Hi, Kelly Morgan here with creativelife.com and the Artist Way writer. And I am so excited today because we have with us Lynda Monk. She is a registered, say hi.
Hi everyone.
Yeah. And she's a registered social worker and a certified life coach. And her book, when I get this straight, is Writing Alone Together, which is journaling in circles of women for creativity, compassion, and connection. I could not be more in alignment with that. So I'm very excited to have you today, Lynda.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Kelly. It's always a treat to connect with a fellow writer and artist, and these mediums. We can connect all over the world. It's exciting.
It's really exciting. And you live where? You live up?
I live on Salt Spring Island, which is between Vancouver and Victoria on the west coast of Canada. So the Pacific Ocean is just over my shoulder out the window. I can throw a frisbee into Fulford Harbor.
Oh, that is
Yeah.
so beautiful up there. So just to get started, how did you get into, and you work a lot with people who are caregivers and who have burned out. How
Mhm.
did you get into that?
Well, my social work career started in fairly high stress, high trauma work. I worked in child protection and I did a lot of crisis response work. I worked as a medical social worker in the emergency department and ICU of a hospital. And I became really curious about how the nature of caregiving work impacts the people who get out of bed every day to do it, because the heart of the work is so emotional and you're supporting the needs of others, quite often in very high stress and distressing circumstances. And I was in my first 10 years as a social worker, and I was already exposed to fellow professionals who either had burnt out or were, really struggling. And I really cared about that. I thought, what are we doing for the caregivers who are doing this important work every day? And so when I did my Master's of Social Work degree back in the 90s, I I just dedicated it to looking at burnout prevention. I wanted to know, how do you do work that's about caring for others and stay healthy yourself? And in the midst of that research, trying to answer that question, I came across all kinds of work on reflective practice, and journaling was mentioned as one of those options as a tool for self-care. And I was already an avid journal writer, and that had been a big part of my own life since being a teenager. And I thought, that's my secret sauce. If I just keep writing and writing about my thoughts and feelings and processing some of the difficult emotions due to the nature of the work and the beautiful nature of caregiving and also the difficult nature of it, that could be hopefully a part of my own self-care in a helping profession. So that's kind of what got me on the path, was my own experience and witnessing the experience of other caregivers who were certainly suffering at times.
I know that when I got sober 30 some years ago, I thought my emotions would kill me.
Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
they were so strong. Do you find that people are having emotions as caregivers and they're feeling maybe guilty about having them that they shouldn't be?
Hmm.
Um, is there anything about that that you can tell us?
Yeah, I think that's a real and honest experience, because as caregivers something that is so noble, but it's also invisible labor. We just expect people to care. And helping professionals, social workers, nurses, educators, people in caring and helping professions, they devote a lot of their time, energy, resources to train to be professional caregivers, which involves a lot of helping skills, including things like empathy and compassion and non-judgment for people. And when you're holding all of those things present when you're trying to help someone, it is those very things that can make you vulnerable to compassion fatigue, burnout. But without them, of course, you can't be very effective doing the work either. And then there's personal caregivers. You know, my father died of Alzheimer's disease just last month. I traveled into Ontario, where I grew up, and had the painful experience of supporting my mom into a care home. She too suffers from Alzheimer's, and there's that whole world of us who are family caregivers
Yeah.
to aging parents or children with special needs or simply parenting. And so caregiving is about an other focused perspective. It's about showing up to help other people. And sometimes caregivers can just feel emotionally exhausted, which is understandable, and they might feel guilty about that. Or they might have really strong feelings of anger towards the people they're caring for and the high needs that those people might understandably have, and then feel bad that they feel angry or feel
Oh, sure.
impatient or frustrated. And these are all normal and experiences in the world of caregiving. But because we think of caregiving as a very natural act, we sometimes minimize how much skills are required to do good, kind, compassionate, skillful care and support of another human being. And we also then minimize what some of the shadow side of that is, which is some of those feelings of guilt or anger, frustration. So we need tools then as caregivers, whether it's a professional role, personal role, that really help us to tune into our own emotions so that we can express them in healthy ways. Journaling's one way to do that. So we can acknowledge them in meaningful ways so that we don't just accumulate all these feelings and get truly worn down from them.
And I noticed here that you have, well, I mean, this to me goes without saying, but circle of women,
Mhm.
because if anyone's going to feel guilty about not caretaking uh, correctly, and maybe becoming a little bit resentful, it would be women more than men. Although I've known men who've done caretaking too, so I would imagine they have some of the same feelings if they're going through this.
Yeah.
Um,
We definitely have gender roles and gender stereotypes about caring and who does caring and
mm,
the value we place on caring. If we look out into caregiving professions, they're some of the most underpaid work in society. Our teachers, nurses, social workers, and whether it's a man or a woman doing that, caregiving itself is a commodity that's undervalued in our society. And you look at the crisis of childcare and affordable childcare, even accessible childcare and elder care. All the spaces that are about caring are often under resourced and under recognized and undervalued. And so that undervaluing of the very nature of caregiving can be something that can contribute to burnout, because someone's giving their heart and soul, their energy, and they're going past even what they have to give, and they're really emptying their own tank of resources in service to caring this thing that sometimes can be undervalued, not always, but it is just one of those things. So it's something that what I see a lot of guilt with, in particular with women, is not so much guilty about caring for the other, because many women just are expected to care for other people. It just goes with the territory. But the guilt comes when they're trying to care for themselves,
mm.
that they feel so called upon in these spheres of caregiving in their lives, whether it's personal, professional, both. And that ability to give permission for guilt-free self-care, where the self gets tended to, the self gets nourished, cared for, supported from within, supported from other people, colleagues, friends, family, can be really hard. Often caregivers have their own self-care on the bottom of their to-do list. It's like they'll get to it if there's time left over. And the nature of caregiving is that it's infinite, it's never done. And so if we're positioned in last place or somewhere down there, the chances of truly showing up in a meaningful way to care for ourselves get very diminished and unlikely. And that is really the crux of burnout, is when that self-neglect sets in, and caring for the self, and doing things that might be nourishing and replenishing, like taking time to write in a journal or go for a walk, eat a healthy meal, whatever one's self-care might be, just gets so backburnered. And that it's a very predictable stage of burnout. Burnout actually has, the research shows, 12 distinct stages in its evolution. And just to simplify it, to think of it, kind of in 5 steps, if you wish, the first stage of burnout is actually deeply caring. It's actually being committed to a person or a cause or something we're so passionate about. And through doing that, we give so much of ourselves to it. And the next phase of burnout is when that self-neglect sets in, because it's focused on the other, it's focused on the caregiving, and it's often over-giving, and it's often giving into a situation that has endless needs. The needs are infinite. And so more and more giving. So for example, if it's a counselor with a caseload in an agency that maybe is under resourced, there's not enough staff, there's more client need than there are people to serve it, you might see that professional stay late and work hours that they're not paid for on their own time. You might see them not take their lunch break. You might see them work on the weekends or not take their holidays, because they're giving, caring into a bottomless pit of need without resourcing themselves and replenishing. And so that subtle deprivation, maybe a professional used to take a lunch break and just have that mental break, take a pause from that caregiving role. They stop doing that. They stay at their desk and do email, or they that subtle deprivation sets in. Maybe they used to exercise, they stop doing that because they're too tired at the end of the day. Maybe they used to connect with their friends to have some fun and social support on the weekends, and they just going to binge watch Netflix instead because it takes too much energy. And so these subtle deprivations set in, and then people start to feel the price of that. So they just stop seeing their own needs as valuable. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the third stage of burnout, where it's like, my needs, what do they have to do with anything? What my feelings, my caregiving, the needs I might have for support, they lose value. And so then this emptiness and depression and feeling miserable and guilty and all these other feelings sets in, and that's the fourth stage of burnout, if you think of it as kind of going,
Wow.
spiraling down. And the fifth is that complete mental collapse. I had a friend once, and we were talking, and I asked her, how did she know that she was experiencing burnout or just, hitting that wall? And she said because when she was in the shower, she could hardly hold her hands up to lather the shampoo. It
Mm.
was just a struggle. Everything was a push. And caregivers who are listening can relate to this complete feeling of depletion. And so that's a long answer, but if we understand burnout not as this thing that just happens overnight or after a bad day or after a stressful week, it's the accumulation of stress and high press without ebb and flow, without refueling and rejuvenating and replenishing, that can happen for caregivers. And when you put that combination together, have high demands for your care, and you have low regular replenishing, refueling self-care, and this formula over time is the recipe for burnout.
I especially am appreciative of you breaking it down into stages, because it isn't this all of a sudden thing, is what I'm hearing. It's happening in stages. And I would imagine if you can recognize it in its earlier stages, you can do something so that it doesn't have to go all the way to the end stages. And
Absolutely.
I thought, God, I'm not a caregiver. And then I realized, well, by the time I was done doing my live business a few years ago before I got married, there had been 20 some years of without any break, just redoing the workshop of the Artist's Way and the writing workshops over and over again, 3 times a year, 66, I mean, whatever it was, 99 classes a year. So when I got married, I felt burned out. I just couldn't do a lot of stuff. I was just studying and everything. Did not realize that that was a maybe a stage of burnout because I love it so much. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to imagine that a lot of caregivers love their job, and that becomes another cause of concern. Well, I'm burned out. If I can't do this anymore and I love it, I'm just going to imagine. So tell me, how can I use journaling
Mm-hmm.
to help me? And I want to bring in one consideration for you. Use journaling to help me and not make it into, oh my God, more to do. I got to journal tonight. I got to
Mm-hmm.
check emails. You know, now you're adding another task. I get this a lot from people I'm working with.
Yeah. Makes me think of when I, many years ago did my research on burnout prevention. One of the things I did was interview professional social workers because it was a
Mm,
social work degree. And it was with consent and just asking, wanting to learn of people's experience with self-care and burnout prevention in the field. And one of the women I interviewed, who later became a wonderful friend and still is, when we sat down for the interview and I started asking her questions, she said, "I don't even want to talk about self-care." And I said, "Okay, great. I mean, that's what we signed up for with the interview, but what would you like to talk about? Or, why don't you want to talk about self-care?" Can't remember the exact words, but what she said was, "It's just one more thing I have to do. It's
mm,
just one more thing I can fail at. One more thing I might not get right or might not have enough to give to it." And it really stayed with me because this pressure of having to.
mm,
Anytime one, feel guilty about something we're about to do, like taking care of ourselves, we already have a psychological obstacle to get to it. Most of us don't go running towards things that make us feel horrible. So if
mm.
we're going to feel guilty and feel badly when we care for ourselves, it's already an obstacle to get
Yeah,
there, right?
yeah.
Then if we put it in the land of should, that doesn't really sound too exciting or inspiring either. So I like to think of it as, what are those little pit stops along the way that help us stay self-aware, because awareness is prevention when it comes to burnout. If
Mm,
we know about the stages, if we know about some of the common signs and symptoms of burnout, being emotionally exhausted, withdrawing from things, stopping to do activities that maybe were self-care, complete exhaustion, frustration, irritability, sore muscles, lower immune system, more illnesses. There's a whole list of symptoms or red flags that call to us for attention, that our own body, our own well-being needs our attention, needs our tender care. And so the journal becomes a place, if we think about pit stops that are, what's joyful for me to do? What would be something in 5 minutes I could do that just I know fills my tank? It fills my well. It makes me feel a little bit happier, a little bit lighter, a little less stressed. And what are those things? Because there's many things to do for self-care that are like the bedrock of our health, right? Getting good sleep, eating a healthy diet, exercising, and social support. We are not short of information in the internet or anywhere else in our public health information about what makes a healthy lifestyle, what helps us be resilient, in our minds and bodies to cope with stress on an ongoing basis. Those are pillars, but those are often the things that go by the wayside when we're feeling really stressed. We know exercise helps with managing stress, but often we might stop exercising when we feel too stressed because we don't feel like doing it. So the good stuff can slide away on us. And if we can have self-care activities, including journaling, and I'll answer your question more fully on that, and they feel good to get to. I want to go take that 5 minutes to write in my journal, because when I do, I feel better. I feel a little refresh button gets hit. I feel like that moment I put my pen to the paper, it's a moment where I say to myself, I'm worthy of this time to write and reflect. I'm worthy to care for myself through writing or through whatever it is I'm doing in that moment, a walk out in nature with my dog, or whatever it is. There's many things in our self-care toolkits, hopefully.
and
But
I just want to say what you said, that's so important, and I want to point this out to people. is that you said 5 minutes.
Mhm.
And a lot of times people think that they have to do morning pages and they have to do 3 pages covered or whatever. And you're saying 5 minutes. And that
Mhm.
way it can be more joyful. And you also are saying that awareness is prevention.
Mhm.
And I'm imagining in that 5 minutes, do you say just like belt out what's going on for you, the
Well,
resentments, that kind of stuff? Or would you
there,
say, look,
I,
focus on the joy or,
yeah, I often advocate for thinking about balance in the journal. So
mm,
it's a space that can hold all that venting and just processing our emotions and getting it out. Today I'm feeling so exhausted because da 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 da, and just literally the catharsis of getting it out.
mm-hmm,
But we don't want to pitch our tent there and make it the only thing we write about. That has a value, it has a cathartic value, and to know how much value it has for you, basically after you're done doing it, stop and say, do I feel better? If you don't, it might not have been that helpful. It might have just been ruminating. It might have just been putting our attention on those stressors in the pages of our journal, and we come away feeling even more exhausted, more depleted. So the best way to know what kind of writing feels healing and nourishing and replenishing for you or for any of us is to do some writing, pause, and say, what do I notice about what I just wrote? How do I feel about what I just wrote? How do I feel from the writing I just did? Because those inquiries keep us as very active agents in our journaling practice. Journaling by nature is a very empowering act. We are
mm-hmm,
always the authorities of our own experience. There's no way to get it wrong. And there are best practices that can help us get the most out of it. So, for example, for journaling to be therapeutic, we need to write about our thoughts and our feelings, not just today I went and got the groceries and dropped my kid at soccer and walked the dog and called my mother. We can capture all the ordinary moments of our lives in our writing. The mundane becomes, some will say, extraordinary through the very act of writing those things down. But this idea of balance, so we have that part of our journal that might be the dumping ground. It's every upset and wrongdoing and whatever it might be. But then there's the other side, where we write about what brings us comfort, where we write about what brings us joy, where we take 5 minutes to write about some aspect of beauty that we can see right now, where we take some time to write down what we're grateful for. And you mentioned earlier, Kelly, about the love of caring. The most rewarding thing I've done in my life, in my career and otherwise, has been being a present, skilled, I've honed and worked on those skills through my career and have had wonderful teachers to really be a compassionate presence to others. It's rewarding, it's meaningful. I would never have wished to have made a career in some other path. And it is even more rewarding. There's even more compassion, satisfaction when we're taking care of ourselves, because the work isn't destroying us. It's adding to us. We have the chance. There's a wonderful teacher, Dr. Lori Perlman, and she teaches about vicarious traumatization, which is another occupational hazard in high care fields. Burnout and compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, and so forth are these sort of unique hazards due to the nature of the work. They're not exclusive to caregiving, but they're prevalent there. She talks about vicarious transformation, how we become more of who we're meant to be, how our lives can be enriched through being caregivers. And so that's the sweet spot. How do we care and have that as a central core of our lives, do it well, and be nourished and sustained and even made better people by the virtue that that's what we're showing up and doing in our lives, versus it being the moment you choose caregiving, it's just a recipe for burnout, a recipe for vicarious trauma. No, these things can be prevented. They're prevented by training. They're prevented by learning. They're learning what the stages are, learning what the symptoms are. We can't address what we don't know, so becoming educated. And then taking that self-care challenge as a very meaningful part of being a caregiver. It's very difficult, we all know this, to help other people if we're not replenished, healthy, and in caregiving, we're the tools of the trade. Our emotional well-being, our psychological well-being, our physical well-being are all aspects that allow us to be good, skillful caregivers with healthy boundaries, with our own self-care. And so the journaling, I always invite people to use it for that emotional check-in when it comes to using it as a burnout prevention tool. Sorry about that. I'm going to just unplug my phone. Sorry, everyone. Um, to that didn't work. Okay, we'll carry on. To use it as that emotional check-in. So sometimes, for example, I mean, I've been journaling now for almost 40 years, so I don't really think about it too much, but I still have favorite prompts I use. So right now I'm feeling,
Mm.
and just set a timer, go for 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and do an emotional check-in.
Mm-hmm.
Because that emotional intelligence and staying very self-aware of how we're feeling, that's actually the barometer that says, what do I need? So if I start writing and I see I feel stressed, I feel tired, I really can't, do anything else today, it's like, that just gave me information in my conscious awareness that says I need to do a bit of self-care tonight. I need to take that pause. I need to replenish because here's how I'm feeling. And those feelings are like the green light, yellow light, red light of burnout prevention. Am I in the green zone where I've still got lots of energy? And maybe what I wrote is right now, I feel so grateful for the joy of, the time I just spent with that person. Where it's an indicator that I have lots of energy, I'm very engaged, or is what I just wrote an indicator that I'm up in that red zone where I'm just getting depleted, I'm tired, I don't have much more to give. And so you can do that self-barometer through the journaling, through the writing about how you're feeling, because sometimes until we pause, we're not, if you think of a mindfulness practice, we're not always consciously aware of how we're feeling, especially when in caregiving you're focused on the feelings and needs of other people by the nature of it. So to bring that focus back to the self, and the journal is a place to do that. The journal is
Well,
for you, about you.
just you. And of course, there's always that metaphor of on a plane, put
Hmm.
the mask on before you put it on your child so you can care of them. And earlier, what you said, awareness is prevention. So, what I'm hearing you say is that the journal is a good place to diagnose where you are on the continuum of well-being for
Hmm.
yourself so you have enough oxygen to give to others.
Hmm.
That's one thing I heard. And then the other thing that I'm hearing is that there's this, you call it a barometer, I call it a compass. And
Hmm.
that's why I say there's a continuum of that. And something very important, I have two more things I want to get in, and we don't have much more time, is I find that the very physical act of writing, not writing on my computer, but the physical act of writing helps to get me back into my body. More than that, there's a old saying, you slow down to speed up. And I remember when I was feeling, I didn't even know I was feeling burnout, but all I could keep saying is I'm slowing down to speed up.
Hmm.
So I could get back to that next phase. Any thoughts on that? Or
Yeah. There's something very primal about putting that pen to paper, being that scribe of our lives, the author of our own experiences. And there is research around the health benefits of expressive writing, writing about the things that, I think of Dr. Pennebaker's work on
yeah.
writing to heal,
Mhm.
where he had people write about the worst traumas and stressors in their life for 20 minutes, and they wrote over a 4-day period. And, there's a whole process of what they do with those 4-day, 20-minute writes. But the outcome was that people were able to tap into their own resilience stories in part. And if we look at things like narrative therapy, which really is all about being with the stories of our lives, in this case, the stories of our caregiving and helping and serving, and doing that in a way where we, if we've had difficult experiences or we've been hurt by the nature of caregiving, to restory that. What have we got from that? What's the resilient story? What's the survival story? What's the who am I now story that really helps us transform our own experience into stories that empower us and support us and strengthen us? And the writing by hand, if we look at some of the neuroscience on writing, and there's a wonderful book by Deborah Ross on, I think it's called My Brain on Ink,
Oh, yes.
uh, really looks at the actual part of the hand that gets placed on the paper activates certain emotional centers in the brain, that even though the research on writing for wellness, there's been some that tries to ask the question, are there more healing benefits from writing by hand than writing by computer, let's say?
Mm-hmm.
And the benefits extend across the mediums.
Mm.
And because in part it's not the medium that does the healing, it's the self-expression that does the healing. It's the narrative, it's the storytelling, it's language, words, all of that. In fact, there's many studies that continue to try to really find that out. Why does, with the studies have proven that writing does indeed support our healing, our wellness. But the question of why that is still has a lot of mystery to it. There's lots of speculation and theories. And so to long answer to your question, I always say use the medium that's going to support you to do the writing.
Yeah.
Don't get too caught up about whether you're writing by hand or writing by computer, or even, I go on walks and I verbally journal in my phone and dictate. So it's the getting it out, and the and art mediums, you don't even have to use words. You can use collage and images and pictures, and there's so many ways to make a beautiful crafting practice of our
Yeah.
journaling.
Right.
And it's your journal. And when we think of journaling for self-care, letting it be creative, letting it be fun, letting it be what you need and want it to be. So when you say I've got 5 minutes or I've got 10 minutes or I'm going to sit and have a cup of coffee and journal, it doesn't feel like a should at all. It feels like that blissful, like when I go to my journal, which I do most days, and it's right here under this other stack. I have two of them right now that I already wrote in today. I have one a friend made me. That's a beautiful, she collaged
Okay.
the front and back. And this is a journal I use for my morning manifestation and gratitude practice. That's the other thing. We can have different applications. This is my everyday go everywhere 8.5 by 11 sketchbook, and the pen goes down the side, and
Yes.
the tools of the trade are fun. And so when our journaling becomes this thing we savor, that we love to do, that we write about all of it, journaling holds the whole of our lives. Because of that, it's very much a healing tool. It's a valuable self-care companion. The research shows us that. Hopefully our own experiences, most of all, give us the evidence that it can help us heal, and it can help us manage stress and make decisions and gain clarity and enjoy these lives we're living by having that reflective practice. And I just think, there's lots of different journaling techniques and exercises, thousands of them.
Now
You can,
we're getting toward the end of the hour, so I'm
yeah.
just wondering, because I have 10 more questions to ask you, but um, uh, are there some of these in your book? Some of these journaling
Yes,
practices?
there's tons. This is the book,
Okay,
Writing Alone Together. There's a domain, writingalonetogether.com, where you can
yeah.
see about the book, and it's available on Amazon. But I publish a weekly journaling newsletter,
Mm,
iajw.com. I'm the director of the International Association for Journal Writing. And I every week publish journaling exercises, prompts, articles,
Oh,
inspiration to keep it all, flowing and fun and creative and supported. And it's a membership community for journal writers worldwide. So I host a monthly writing circle on Zoom where people gather from around the world and we write together. And that cultivates lots of ideas. And it's there's a free gift there. If you go to iajw.org/journal writing, all one word, it takes you to a page where you can access a free gift called 7 servings of journal juice. And it's 7
mm,
emails that come every day filled with journaling inspirations and ideas and tips. And yeah.
wonderful. So that, just to say it one more time, is writing alone together, journaling in a circle of women for creativity, compassion, and connection. And then there's the ihaw.org, which once a month you do meet to write together. And I know I just
I,
signed
IAJ,
a.
International Association for Journal Writing. It's one of those tricky acronyms,
Yeah,
iajw.org.
thanks for see, that'll help people remember it. IAJ.
Myself included.
W. And I think I signed up for something on Facebook in the group there myself,
Yeah.
because I'd like to be a part of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm Kelly Morgan with creativelife.com. And I just want to interview again. I have 10 more questions, but sometime they'll have to wait.
Let's do it.
Yes, let's do it. Okay. Well, thank you very much. And I am going to stop the recording.